Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode. Today we have with us from the Netherlands, Marjolein Pilon. Hey Marjolein, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to have you. And of course, we'll be talking about a topic that I think many of our listeners will be interested in. This is, of course, about how our teams and our industry, the software products industry, affects the carbon footprint on the planet. Marjolein is an enthusiastic freelance Scrum Master and Agile coach committed to making the IT community more carbon efficient, with a passion for planet Earth and a knack for facilitating creative teams. She embodies Agile and Scrum values, promoting team autonomy, and continuous improvement. Marjolein shares her insights also on her website, so check it out, theagileplayground.com. But Marjolein, that was a short intro. First, let's start by exploring your journey into this whole, let's call it, thread of taking into account planet Earth as a stakeholder, which is something you talk about. So what got you started with that?
Yeah, I think what got me started was about 2 years ago that I was really frustrated about climate change and about a limited impact that I could have on that. And I had children, small children, and I wanted to make sure, well, I mean, you never really can make sure, of course, but I want to help them have a good future. And as I was looking into ways how I could help diminish climate change, we had solar panels on our roof, we had a heat pump in the garden, and we did basically in our home what we could do. And then one day I was talking to my Scrum team about this, and we were like, what can we do? And I shared this frustration. And then I asked them the question, do you actually know what the carbon footprint of our IT landscape is? And then they literally had no idea, and they had never even thought about it. But they were intrigued by my questions. So then we decided to do a retrospective about it. And so we called it a planet retrospective. And I prepared it a bit with green IT principles. You can find them on the web. But that was still very far away from our bad show back then. And so what we mainly did is we reviewed them, and then we did a brainstorm about how we could actually reduce our energy usage of our IT landscape. And one of the developers said, I think we could easily reduce our carbon footprint by 10% easily if we would just optimize some queries, and if we would also get rid of some legacy components that we have. And that really triggered me. And then I was like, all my team should have this conversation, right? So then there were other teams were interested in it as well. So I hosted this Planet retrospective for other teams as well. And then first in our department, and then also I worked at a large bank back then. And then also later in other departments and other teams were interested. So this really started a conversation. And yeah, that was really, really cool. So that is how it all started.
And I can imagine the first few questions that came up when you were talking to that Scrum Master, right? Like maybe they looked at you and said, what are you on about?
Yes.
This is so far from us. Yeah. What are you talking about? How did you get that interest? You said they were curious about your questions, but what was it that triggered then the people around you, right? Because you were already thinking about it, but how did you help the others kind of realize that, hey, maybe this is a question worth exploring?
They also helped me realize it. I mean, it was almost coincidentally, how do you say that I got into this? Because I was thinking about how I could have a meaningful impact. And then my team was also like, oh, yeah, our IT landscape also consumes a lot of energy, but we actually don't know about it and we have never thought about it. So I think it went both ways. And also because, I mean, the people in my team, they also were worried about climate change. So, and what I found when I started doing this, and also when I started talking about it more, that we within IT could do something about this, I found that 99% of the people that I talk to, they are like, yeah, this is maybe something we could do. This would be awesome if we could reduce our IT carbon footprint. So people are enthusiastic about it. They like the idea because they want to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only imagine, like, once you first had that retrospective and then started to see the interest and how it spread, because I imagine that could have been also quite motivating.
Absolutely. There was, oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there was one time we were having drinks with our department, and then I just started with this, and I was like telling everybody, you know what we should do? We should see the planet as our stakeholder. And everybody was like, oh, that is a really great idea. So, and that is also how I helped motivate other people, but also got motivated myself, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that's a key aspect, of course, because if we're struggling against all of the resistance, it's not going to get a lot of energy for us. But when we see that others are also interested and others are also worried, then it can become quite a big thing and quite motivating for us to explore.
Totally. And I think what I feel, at least for myself, I am more about inspiring other people with this than about convincing them. Because then people also get motivated to start doing this themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a key point, actually,
Yes.
because the motivation is going to be key for the sustainability of the efforts that we need to do. So can you share with us a specific example or story when you helped the team reframe their project or the things that they were doing? Maybe it's that example you were referring to as the first team, or maybe it's something else, some other team that started to really take into account Mother Earth as a stakeholder.
Yes. So, okay. So it was not actually this first team. They really wanted to do something, but there was another team that really started reducing their footprint. And how did they do it? Well, we first did this workshop, and then they defined the first steps that they could take. And I think it is very important to emphasize taking a first step, how important that is. I mean, that is also a way to tackle complexity, right? So, and I think the first step was, I'm not sure anymore, it was about getting rid of a test environment that they no longer used. And back then they had no measurements in place yet. So they could not measure what the impact of that was. But I mean, it was also common sense, right? I mean, if you get rid of a test environment that you don't use, then I mean, you will reduce your carbon footprint or your energy usage. So, and then what they started to do is they had meetings about, they proceeded with the insights of the first steps that I already took. And then one day I talked to them and they were like, yeah, you don't know it, but we are actually doing a sustainability sprint right now to optimize our landscape. And they did that by, like, for example, optimizing queries that you don't. So for example, they optimized their queries so that they only got the information that they needed instead of a whole lot of information and data that they didn't use anyway. So what they also did is they wrote a script for their applications that they didn't use outside of office hours. So these applications would then shut down immediately after office hours and in the weekends. So what they started to do basically was looking through this other lens. It was not anymore about maximizing performance, maximizing availability of all the applications, not about limited data storage anymore. They were really becoming conscious about this. So they started to look through this other lens, so they started to look at their IT environment through the sustainability lens. And that really shaped their whole landscape. And I think after 8 or 9 months, they had already reduced their carbon footprint by 45%.
Oh, wow. That is huge.
That is huge. And that is something that they could do on their own as a team. And they were still at this large bank. And then later, I had already left the bank and I talked to them and they were like, okay, so now we have done everything that we could, that was within our
as a team,
influence,
right?
as a team. And if we want to proceed with this now, we need architectural changes. But that was such an inspirational story for me because it is, there is so much that we can do within our sphere of influence. And I think teams often underestimate what their own impact can be.
Yeah, and I think that many teams also often underestimate what their footprint is already. And these days, it's early 2024 as we record this episode, and we hear about huge data centers being built for AI-based applications. Yes. AI is the equivalent of a gas guzzler for IT infrastructure. We're talking about, hundreds of GPUs, which are immensely power hungry, being used to serve ChatGPT queries, as an example. I think somebody did a calculation that a ChatGPT query is several orders of magnitude more expensive energy-wise than a query on Google. And that's something we all can take into account because, of course, all energy usage has a direct environmental impact. Some data centers use renewable energies, but most don't.
Yes, and we need to become more mindful of that.
Yeah.
So currently, it is estimated that the energy usage of data centers worldwide is about 1 to 2% of global energy use. So then you're like, okay, that is maybe not too big. It is comparable to aviation, to the energy usage of aviation. But the thing about the IT footprint is that it is going to rise and exponentially. So if we become mindful of it now, and if we start reducing our IT carbon footprint now, and also start integrating this way of thinking, that will really help in the future to not let it go out of hand.
Absolutely. And we can say that, looking at the future and what has happened since about the 60s or so, when IT started to be very, very, taken up and used in industry, we can say that we are probably at the smallest use of IT we've ever been as a species, right? Mm-hmm. That means that it's going to grow much, much more than what it is today, and one can think of many different aspects of that. But another thing that I got from your story is that there's still a lot of things we can do as teams. Like we don't need to go and start, banging on the data center doors. Let's not forget that many organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of servers installed in their own premises using the grid as the source of energy. And of course, the generic electricity grid has the most carbon intensive energy that we can imagine because it's produced for the whole country, wherever you might be.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I think it's important to explore, though, is how to measure that impact. Like one of the things you said is that some of your teams didn't have any metrics when you started talking to them about. So how do you measure and assess the impact of software and product development on the environment? Are there, for example, some approaches, some things you have come up with that are repeatable by teams in assessing their carbon footprint?
Yes. So I think it is not very complicated. We can just have a look at our energy usage. So if you have your all your data or your servers on premise, then you can look at your energy bill. And if you have it all in a data center or maybe in Amazon or Azure cloud, then you can look it up. Then you have also these dashboards, like Azure has a carbon footprint dashboard, Amazon has one as well. So you can look it up, and I think they're not very sophisticated yet. But I mean, it gives you some basic info on your footprint, and then you can start diminishing and see how the trend goes down.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned, which I think is brilliant, like we used to think of IT as we need to optimize performance, right?
Yes.
And because we need to optimize performance, we typically use more resources to deliver
Yes.
that performance. And the example you gave is that when the team started looking at what they were doing, they found performance and carbon footprint gains by just, in your case, fine-tuning some of the queries that they were doing. So have you found like things that your teams have used that are like really team-centric, if you will, like, you know, for example, how much data we get from a query, like in this example, or other things that they have used to, as a proxy, measure their footprint?
As a proxy, I think a good proxy for measuring your energy usage is also your cost metrics, right? So if your cost goes down, probably your energy usage is going down and your carbon footprint is going down. So, and that is also very interesting if you need to convince your managers or your directors of becoming more sustainable and of doing this with your IT, then it is also a one-on-one result and a cost. How do you say that? It's reducing your cost. So I think that as a proxy is also really powerful.
And also gets us the permission to do, like you said in your example, like this sustainability sprints.
Yeah.
So when you think about decision making, of course, we're talking about like one clear decision is, of course, do we spend time on this, right? Because there are many competing requirements all the time. So that's one type of decision. But are there other tools or frameworks that you found helpful when working with teams about decision making regarding how much to take planet Earth as a stakeholder into account?
Well, what I really found very helpful and what I always use in my workshops is the circle of influence, and that we like prioritize based on the influence that we can have with actions. So what I always do is I ask teams as a first question, what is needed to reduce the IT carbon footprint of your company or of your team? And then I let them brainstorm, and then they come up with all kinds of ideas, and they can go as broad as they want. And then the next step is to prioritize it and to see, okay, so what is the value of this idea and what is the effort of this idea? So then you can see where your strategic wins are and where your low-hanging fruit is. And I think it is very important in defining a first step to identify a low-hanging fruit, right? So and then we take it to the circle of influence and we see what is in your direct power as a person, as a team, and then also what is in your circle of concern.
Influence, yeah.
Yeah, of concern, which is outside of your circle of influence.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you pull it inward? So maybe,
Okay.
I mean, often people say, yeah, we really need to do something about tender management. We really should include green criteria in our tender management, right? So if you have a tender for a IT environment, then that it should be based on green principles. And then teams go like, but we have no impact on that. That is outside of our sphere of influence. And then I ask them always to, how can you redefine this? How can you redefine this tender management thing into an action that you do have impact on, that you can pull it inward into your sphere of control? And then people may come up with, oh, I know a person there. Maybe I can have a conversation with him. So I make it small. We make it small, and that is something that is, of course, very powerful. And then we go to the 15% solutions. What is something that you can start right now with? In the coming sprint, what can you take on yourself without permission from anybody and without dependencies. And then I always ask them to start doing that. And then that really helps people get started. And starting with your first step and defining your first step is so empowering, right? So with your first step, it may seem so small, but you have a positive impact. You have a positive impact on your surroundings because you can talk about what you do and it gets you started. And then you can use those first steps, if you have done them, use the insights, inspect and adapt, and then define your new step.
What are some of the first steps that you've seen teams come up with and implement when you get started with them and you host the workshop that gets them kickstarting the project of taking the planet as a stakeholder?
Most of the time, it is about raising awareness. People get excited by the workshop. People get excited by that they can actually do something. And then their first step often is, I'm going to talk about this with my own team. I'm going to facilitate a planet retrospective. I'm going to clean up my own email. I'm going to talk to the manager. Often also people like architects, when they join, they are going to talk to the architectural board. So it is most of the time the first steps are about raising awareness.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that came into my mind immediately is that, especially for those of us who work with the cloud, it's very easy to start up new environments and then not close them down cleanly so that there's no resources being used anymore. And that's like a very simple thing that we can put into our default code review checks, right? When a test environment is spinned up, then it's also spun down and we don't need to worry about it staying there and consuming resources, which in some cases, and in one company that I worked with, was the equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars in costs every year.
Yes, I know that it is huge. So exactly true. That is right. I mean, people often say as a first step, we're going to take down or to review our IT landscape and see what we can shut down. We're going to analyze what we can do and then also start with the first environment that we no longer use, test environments. Maybe they don't have to be on always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes sustainability can be something we hear about in the news. And we have talked about first steps, something practical that we can do to have an impact right away. What are other strategies you use to bring that theme that can be, quite high level? Of course, it's what politicians talk about.
Yes.
What do you use? What are strategies you use to bring that down to the day-to-day level when you're talking to your teams?
Yeah. So, what is very helpful is, like, for example, you can integrate a planet in your Scrum events. So you can include climate impact in your review, in your sprint review, in your retrospectives. You can include climate impact in your definition of done. Something like energy usage is reduced, something like that. You can integrate that into your way of working. And I think that is really helpful because it encourages you to always think about the planet and to integrate it like a non-functional into your way of working.
And so I think that's also a great way for us to escape the trap, of thinking that this is too big, I can't do anything about, right?
Mm-hmm. It is not too big. We can have so much impact, right? What I told you, this team of mine, that they reduced their carbon footprint by 45%. I mean, isn't that inspiring? And that is something that we can all do.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know if we can all reduce it by 50%, but there is always room for improvement. Yeah, and I think we as Scrum Masters, we can also coach and facilitate our teams in this, right? In a green way of working and encourage our developers to pick up green software practices and green tooling and help our product owners to express and promote also a vision on sustainability and to include long-term value for the environment into their vision, right? Into the product vision.
And I
there's a
think
lot
that
of
inspiration is very important for change management. And talking about inspiration, what is one resource that you think teams that are interested in this could look into and get even more inspiration from reading? Could be a book, a video, a blog, whatever that is that helps us go deeper into the topic.
Yeah. What really helped me, I have this book, and it is in Dutch. It's the English title is The Good Ancestor. This book, The Good Ancestor, is about long-term thinking. And that is something that really helped me in also in finding ways how to help my teams and my audience in my talks to envision a green future. It is also about envisioning this. It is about, maybe, do you know the term cathedral thinking?
What does that mean?
Back in the day, they started building these cathedrals, right? These big cathedrals. What is this one called in Barcelona? This they recently
Sagrada Familia, the one
yeah,
that
the
they're
Sagrada
still
Familia.
building.
Oh, they're still building it, and they started it centuries ago, right? This mindset of starting something beautiful and big, and that you will never see finished in your own lifetime. I mean, that is, I love that mindset. And I think we need some more of that, so we need to think about the generations after us. And this book really helped me with that. So it helped me to also envision this and to see, like, for example, you have this story in ancient Indian cultures, and it is about a seventh generation. So it is about how do you look at the impact that you have on your surroundings, the impact that you have on the climate, and then also the impact that you have on the generations after you. So, and this is a whole new way of decision making. And also it is quite liberating, right? So you don't have to only look at your own small time perspective, but you can look beyond. So
Absolutely.
I really love that.
Marjolein, thank you very much for all of the inspiration you've shared with us today. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing, where should they go?
They could go to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and they could connect with me. I'm also I have my website, the Agile Playground, and the planet-as-a-stakeholder.com for inspiration on the topic that we talked about today.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to those on the show notes to make sure that people can go and find them easily, and of course get in touch with Marjolein. And why not invite her to host a workshop with your team if you're inspired to think about this topic.
I would love
yourself.
that.
Absolutely. Marjolein, thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great pleasure.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.